you're in that space, you will see our little cubicle over there. We have our first little physical space, and really kind of being able to help and connect with the Family Justice Center as much as we're able to. Um, I'm a queer person myself. I got involved with PFLAG actually through my mom, who reached out to PFLAG when I came out. So it has a special place in my heart, and I'm really excited to be able to do these education and these trainings through PFLAG.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have some slides to share with you all. Okay, hopefully you can see this one.
You are good.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, yeah. So first, if you just, quick housekeeping things. I know Natalie did mention making sure that you are on mute. But if you have questions throughout the presentation, we love questions. Any questions coming from a place of wanting to learn is very much open. So you can either use the raise your hand feature, you can ask it in the chat, you can send Lainey or myself a private message. We'll either answer it in the moment if it feels pertinent to that moment, or if it's something we're going to be covering or we want to wait until the end, we'll go ahead and do that too. So we'll kind of let you know, but please feel free if you have a question, just send it in the chat. Again, make sure you're muted, and then make sure we're respecting everybody's privacy. This is a safe space, so if Lainey and I share something, if somebody shares something through questions, things like that, just know that this is somewhere safe, and so we want to not be sharing what's been shared out into the world. Objectives for today, just kind of a few things we're going to be generally going over. We're going to go over terminology, just kind of understanding gender, sexual orientation a little bit deeper of a level. We're going to do some practice with pronouns, some look at our internal bias, and sort of how that impacts how we interact with the world. And then looking at best practices, making sure that we are really providing the best support that we can for LGBTQ people in your place of work, in your life, anything like that. A quick note before we even get into anything else. We want to always be using the term and label that someone uses for themselves. We will be talking about different identities, different things like that. And we just want to, before we even get into all of that, just know if someone's told you the pronouns that they use, the name they use, the identity that they have, that is the only true way to know how someone identifies and who they are. It's that they've told you. And so we want to really respect that. If someone has shared that with you, make sure we are using the correct terms, the correct labels, the correct pronouns for someone else. And you're on mute, Lainey.
Sorry. So two screens. I have like one share and one talking. Also, right at the start, we want to talk a little bit about this impact versus intention. We know everyone in this room has good intentions. You're here, you're doing the work that you do because you have a good heart, and no one's questioning that. But we're all human. We make mistakes. And so when we make mistakes, we want to focus on the impact that our mistakes have had, not just our intentions behind that. So, because when harm is caused, the important thing is to repair harm. I could be like the best driver in the world, right? I've never gotten a parking ticket even. But if I run over someone's foot and they're screaming in pain, and I'm like defending myself, I'm a great driver, I've never gotten a parking ticket, right? Like that's not the right response. We want to say, I'm calling the ambulance. Can I get you some water? Can I help you sit down? Like the repair is what we want to focus on. So that's really important for this work because it's a when, not an if. We're all going to make mistakes. When we make mistakes, we want to make sure that we're doing better moving forward, that we are repairing that relationship, or maybe we're repairing the systems that have caused that harm. All right. We would love to play a little game with you all. So Taylor mentioned that, sorry, let me do this. I'm going to back out of my share screen. Okay. I'm going to drop this link in the chat so you can play this game. And you can just click on the link if you want to, or if you're like on different devices, you can go to this play.blookit.com, which hopefully you can still see on the Zoom screen, and then you type in the game ID. So Taylor mentioned we're going to do some like terminology and language, but we don't want to just sit here and like give you definitions, because that's not fun to learn that way. So let's play a little game. You don't have to if you don't want to. You're going to get assigned a name. So it's anonymous, right? No one will know how you answered. For those of you who have not played a Look It game before, there are two things. First is accuracy, so you have to answer the question correctly. And the second is speed. So it's how fast you answer. For the purposes of this game, I don't know is always a valid answer. So when we're doing this work, I don't know, always a valid answer. Okay, so I'll give folks, another like 30 seconds to join. And then if you like can't get in, it'll allow late joins. So you can still join late. No big deal. And okay, so you should see, I'm gonna put the link in the chat one more time, just in case you missed it, or in case it didn't pop up for you because you're on your phone. When you're playing the game, look at your screen, not mine. Because mine will just be running the game. You need to answer on your own screen. Okay, I'll give folks like 5 more seconds to hop in, and then we'll get started. Okay, people are still joining, so I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. All right, it's 10 questions total, so it's not super long. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get it started. If you're trying to join, just join late, no big deal. All right. All right, get ready. So look at your screen, not the screen share. So what does the LGB stand for in LGBTQIA+? Ladies, gentlemen, girls and boys, lesbian, gay, and bisexual, lavender graduation ball, or I don't know. And I think it gives you 15 seconds to answer. So accuracy and speed. All right. Yes. Okay. We all got that one correct. Yes. Lesbian, gay, bisexual. So this is about sexual orientation. This is about our relationship to other people, right? Like who we are attracted to, romantically, physically. A note here, gay, a lot of folks use this as an umbrella term. So, someone of any gender might just say, oh, I'm gay. Doesn't necessarily refer to someone who's a man. All right. Let's go ahead and go. Water Song, you're in the lead. Okay, next question. What does the T stand for in LGBTQIA+? I don't know. Transgender, transsexual, transvestite. Reminder that I don't know is always a valid answer if you're uncertain. All right, yes. So transgender, I'm just going to pause again for a moment. And so it's at one point or another, all of these words have been used, right, in the past. And so as we update our language, like this could change again, right? We might use different language in the future. So, but right now, transgender is the word that we're using for this aspect of gender identity. So being transgender doesn't have anything to do with your sexual orientation. This is about how we see this is about our relationship to ourselves. So this is about how we see ourselves and how we see our own gender. So this isn't about other people. This isn't about our, who we're attracted to. This is about our own relationship with ourselves. Okay, and we'll talk more about this later. All right, let's see. Looks like things have shifted around a little. All right, next question. What does the Q stand for in LGBTQIA+? Quitting the gender binary, quietly waiting to come out, queer and or questioning, or I don't know. Reminder that I don't know is always a valid answer if you're uncertain. All right. Yes, so queer and or questioning. So I'm going to go back to the slides just for a moment, if you don't mind. And so if you could look at my Zoom screen instead of your game screen. um, so yes, questioning is like someone who's actively questioning their gender identity or their sexual orientation. This is somewhat more common when folks are young, or maybe they don't have the vocabulary to express how they feel, or maybe they're just not supported enough to really explore who they are. I gotta say, as someone in my 40s, I know way more people in their 40s who have recently come out than I ever did in high school. um, Queer. So we want to be careful with using this word. Um, Umbrella term used by some folks in the community to describe themselves, to describe the community. This word for a long time, though, was used as a slur. It was really used as a weapon against people. And so there are some folks in the community who will never use the word queer to describe themselves. I use that word. Other folks will use that word, and it's okay to use that word if someone has given you permission to use it for them. But again, use the language that someone uses for themselves. It's not a bad word in the right context, but folks really are sensitive to this. And I would say it's a little bit of like an in-group, out-group kind of word. So if you don't personally identify as LGBTQ in some way, then you could just say, instead of saying the queer community, you could just say the LGBTQ community, right? And that conveys the same thing without the potential for people being upset about it. Okay. I'm going to go back to the game. Okay, so look at your game screen again. All right, let's see. Water Song, you're still in the lead. Oh, some movement though. Okay. What does the I stand for in LGBTQIA plus? Independent genders, intersex, indigenous genders. I don't know. It's okay to take your time and think about it. Right. So intersex. If anyone has a definition for intersex, I would love for you to come off of mute and share or type it in the chat. I'm going to share our definition and a little bit of information. But if anyone has like you feel like you have like a good definition, feel free to come off mute or type in the chat if you'd like. And if not, that's okay too, because I'll just share ours. But sometimes someone has like something ready. And I want to pull this one out. So again, if you come back to my screen, not your game screen. So intersex folks, this is like a naturally occurring variation. If you take middle school biology, you might learn that sex is binary, but nature doesn't do binaries very well. And so intersex folks have a combination of maybe hormones, chromosomes, internal, external genitalia, any other primary or secondary sex characteristics that fall outside of our idea or like sort of the commonly held concept of what is male or female. Globally, probably about 1% to 2% of the population. A lot of folks don't know that they are intersex until they reach puberty or until they are, maybe trying to have a family, or sometimes even, afterwards, like in autopsies, sometimes we find out people are intersex. So, little fact about this too. Another group of folks that are about 1% to 2% of the global population, redheads. So, because sometimes it's hard to conceptualize like what that means. So if you know someone who's redhead, you might know someone who's intersex too. Okay, whoops, sorry. All right, look at your game screen again. All right, a little bit of movement on the leaderboard. Oh, no, Water Song, you're still in the lead. Okay. What does the A stand for in LGBTQIA plus? Assumptions about gender, ally, I don't know, asexual and or aromantic. All right. Yes. So asexual or aromantic. So I remember when I was in college, that A in the acronym, a lot of folks did use that for ally. Um, but ally is not a marginalized identity, right? So the asexual aromantic, you might also see agender, but asexual aromantic, these are folks who are not sexually or romantically attracted to other folks. You might hear ace or arrow. So those are like common terms that you might hear in the community. All right. Ruby Staff in the lead now. Oh, no, still water song. All right. Next question. What does the plus stand for in LGBTQIA plus? So other gender identities or sexual orientations, friends and families of LGBTQIA folks, equality, or not sure. Right. So other gender identities or sexual orientations. So sometimes you will see LGBTQIA A P 2S, like agender, pansexual, two-spirit, like there's other identities that are under the rainbow. And so just for shorthand, we're going to say plus. So you will hear LGBTQ plus, you will see LGBTQIA plus. The plus is just saying there are more identities here that we are going to include. Thanks. Water song, still in the lead. Okay, next one. What term is commonly used to describe people who identify outside of the gender binary? Pansexual, androgynous, non-binary, or I don't know. Yes, non-binary. Non-binary is an umbrella term. We'll talk about that more later. Oh, all right. Some movement on the leaderboard. Last couple of questions here. A transgender woman likely uses which pronouns? She, her, they, them, he, him? I don't know. All right. Yes. So again, we'll talk more about trans identities in a little bit. Um, if someone says that they're a woman, though, whatever the adjective is before that, likely a woman uses she, her pronouns. Um, and we'll get all into the ins and outs of trans identities and pronouns in a little bit. This quiz also helps us figure out like what we need to touch on. So it's good. All right, so Lainey uses they, them pronouns because I do. How would you say Lainey is currently speaking? They is speaking, they are speaking. You can't use they, them pronouns for a single person, or I don't know. Okay. I will give you the grammar lesson later when we get to pronouns. But yes, they are speaking, and we'll talk a little bit more about like why you would do it that way. All right, even though I'm a single person. Or should I say I am one person? Okay, last question. Why does the L come first in the acronym? LGBTQIA plus. This is like a little bit of pop culture fun fact. Is it because lesbian is the most common identity? It's the easiest way to say it, or it honors the lesbian nurses who cared for gay men during the AIDS epidemic. Yeah. All right. Some of you knew this. Yes. So it honors the lesbian nurses who cared for gay men during the AIDS epidemic. If you look at old media, you will very likely, or like old societies, sometimes it will say GLT for gay first. And then after the AIDS epidemic, this got switched to have that honoring. All right, final standings. Ruby staff. All right. Water song. All right. If you want to identify yourself in the chat, feel free to claim your glory. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Nicely done, everyone. And we're going to come back to my slides. Okay.
Awesome.
Yay.
Yes. No, well done. Well done, everyone. Like Lainey said, the quiz is fun, but it is also helpful just to kind of know where the audience is at with certain things. But now we have the gender unicorn. So I don't know if anyone has ever seen the gender unicorn before. You might have actually seen the genderbread person. Very similar concept, a different image for it. But the gender unicorn is a really cool sort of representation of gender identity, of sexual orientation. But it was created by trans youth to really sort of represent their experience and what it, how gender is experienced and how it's separated out in different components. So the gender unicorn, you first have gender identity. So it's the little rainbow in the little thought bubble coming out of the unicorn's brain. And that is how they identify. That's who little unicorn knows that they are inside. You see three different continuums there. Originally on the genderbread person, and sometimes you'll even see it on the gender unicorn, but it was actually a continuum. So you had female on one side and male on the other. So essentially you kind of find where you fall within that. But people found that creates a situation where if I'm feeling more male, that means I'm feeling less female, and that's not necessarily true. So it's been broken out into different continuums to really identify where someone feels, how female, how male they would identify with, and what kind of fits their gender identity. So again, that's the little rainbow in the brain. That's who that person is. And then you have gender expression. It's a little dotted line outside of the unicorn. This is how someone is expressing their gender to the world. Again, you have the same continuums, and this can come in a lot of different ways. It could be the pronouns someone uses. It could be their haircut, the clothes they're wearing. But important to note too, depending what audience you're working with, who you're talking to, their gender expression might not be matching the gender identity that they have. So it's important to not base any assumption on what their gender identity is from what you're seeing on the outside, especially when you're working with maybe young people. They might not have the ability to dress the way they want or express themselves the way that they feel. So it's just really important to sort of, keep that in mind when you're looking at somebody. And then you have sex assigned at birth. This is broken down, like we talked about before, with intersex. So you have female, male, intersex. This is just talking about the parts someone was born with, their biology. And you'll notice too, that is an entirely separate thing from gender identity, and that they are not one and the same. And then you have physical and emotional attraction. It's the little hearts in the unicorn. This is who someone is attracted to. And it's separated too. Physical and emotional attraction can be different. We often maybe think that they're going to be the same thing. Someone's physically and emotionally attracted to the same audience of people. And maybe that's true for some people, but it's not true for everybody. And for some people, it really does vary. And again, you have the same continuums with looking at physical and emotional attraction, and that it really does have quite a spectrum and a variance for people. But ultimately, the gender unicorn just really kind of encapsulates a person as a whole and all the different facets that sort of make up someone's gender identity, their gender expression, and their sexual orientation. One key takeaway, both from the quiz from the gender unicorn, is that sexual orientation and gender identity are not connected. They're both part of the LGBTQ acronym, but that's because they're both marginalized communities. Knowing someone's sexual orientation does not tell you anything about their gender identity, and vice versa. if I know someone's trans, I have no idea who they're attracted to. Um, I think sometimes we start thinking as soon as someone's trans that they might be gay or things like that. Honestly, that was something I had assumed when I was younger because the one trans person I knew was gay. And so I kind of just created a full thing for everyone with that. Um, but they're totally separate things. Now, looking at more gender identity terms, right? We've used the term transgender, we've kind of looked at what that is, but it's important to take a little bit of a step back and understand that transgender and cisgender are just adjectives, right? So these are both adjectives talking about someone's gender identity. Everyone has a gender identity. And it's important, one, to look at it as sort of not an us and them situation. I think oftentimes we kind of hear, well, there's the trans community and then there's everybody else. Whereas it's actually, there's everybody. Some people are cis, some people are trans, but we're all part of the everyone. So these are both adjectives. They're describing how someone's gender identity connects with their body, the sex that they were assigned at birth. So you have cisgender, comes from the Latin term cis on the same side. That's someone whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. So the opposite of that is transgender. Trans on the opposite side of someone's gender identity doesn't match the sex that they were assigned at birth. Like I said, they're both adjectives. They're just talking about how someone connects with their gender identity and the sex that they were assigned or assumed at birth. So you would say the trans community, the trans person, the trans woman. You would never say that someone is a transgender. It's not a noun. You wouldn't say that someone transgendered or is transgendering. It's not a verb. It's an adjective. So a trans person. Now, looking a little bit, Lainey mentioned that transgender is an umbrella term, right? There's a lot of different identities that fall within that trans umbrella. So what we're kind of usually most often have seen are trans women and trans men. So a trans woman would be a woman who was assigned male at birth. A trans man is going to be the opposite. Typically, individuals here will use the pronouns that match their gender identity. And Lainey had said it, and I want to repeat it because I think it's a really great way to make sure that you don't accidentally misgender someone and use the wrong pronouns. Like we had just talked about, transgender, cisgender, they're adjectives. So if you know someone is a trans man, just cover up that adjective just as if you knew they were a funny man. The man is who they are, so that's probably going to tell you what pronouns they're using. Um, Ultimately, the only way to truly know is for them to have told you what pronouns they use, but it's going to be a pretty safe bet if they told you they're trans man that those are the pronouns that they use. But it goes with who they are, not with the adjective that describes them. And then you have this gender diverse umbrella. So this falls actually within the trans umbrella, and these are individuals who don't identify as being exclusively male or female. The most common one you might be familiar with hearing, and we had it in the quiz, was non-binary. Um, Non-binary is really looking at, as the name implies, someone who doesn't identify within the binary of gender of male and female, but outside of that. And you have different identities here. You have gender fluid, gender queer, but these are all just really looking at someone whose gender identity doesn't fall as specifically male or female. Oftentimes, individuals here will use they, them pronouns, but just like the other ones, we said typical, it's not a hard and fast rule. Ultimately, the only way to truly know is for someone to have told you, but commonly you'll see individuals in here use they, them pronouns for themselves. And then non-binary within the trans umbrella is another umbrella term, right? It's just looking at how someone doesn't identify as male or female. It's not within that binary of gender. And there's a lot of identities that fall within that. I am not telling you you need to memorize every single one of these, and this isn't even all of them. But important to note that if someone tells you that they identify as one of the different things, that this is where it would fall. PFLAG National has a really fantastic glossary of all different terms, and even outside of that, just different terms that are related to being LGBTQ. There's a link for it here, and I think we did mention it in the chat, but we will be sharing the slides with everyone that's here today, so you'll have access to this, you'll have access to that link, and the slide deck in general. But if someone has told you that they identify as one of these things, take a look, kind of understand a little bit more maybe what that means for that person. Now, gender affirming practices or gender affirming care. We often hear this term, and so I think it's really important to take a little bit of a deeper look at what that means. Um, Ultimately, it's bringing someone, their body, who they are, into alignment with their gender identity. You might hear the term transitioning oftentimes. That's kind of what that's talking about. We've broken it down a little bit into different ways that someone might affirm their gender. But before I even get into that, I want to really emphasize the fact that someone who is transgender does not need to do any of the things on this list. Their identity, who they are, is not dependent on, checking off the boxes on this list at all. Two people, one of them may have done everything on this list, one of them may have done nothing on this list, and they're both equally valid and both transgender, if that is how they identify. So I think it's really important. I think growing up, I always had the assumption that somebody may want to pass or really wanted to get all of these things done, and that's definitely not true. That may be true if that's what someone feels the need to do to affirm their gender, but um, someone is not more or less valid in being transgender depending on what they've done from this list. Um, so looking at this list a little bit in depth, you have social, legal, and medical. So social is really that gender expression. It's the name someone's using, it's the pronouns they're using, it's how they've cut their hair, how they're talking, anything like that, it's how they're showing themselves to the world. Legal is a name change, gender marker change, and then medical is anything from puberty blockers to gender confirmation surgery. And there's quite a few things that would fall in that medical component. And I think it's important too to note these are not only things that somebody who's transgender may do. This is just talking about, reaffirming and affirming someone's gender identity. So there are people who are cisgender who do things from this list too. Maybe someone who goes by a nickname, anything like that. But it's not just individuals who are trans who may be doing any kind of gender affirming practices. And finally, looking at gender identity, and we talked a little bit about non-binary identities, but it's really important to note that this isn't a new concept. The idea of a third gender, of more than two genders, of a gender outside of that binary has been around for a very, very long time in many different cultures, in different traditions. We've listed three here, but even if there's more than just these three for sure. And so it's actually a very much of a Western thing to have just the binary of two genders. And so I think that's just really important. It's not a new concept, this idea of being non-binary or identifying outside of male and female, but it's actually been around for quite a long time.
All right. So now this is where if you want to come off of mute or just type in the chat, we are curious, what is a gender stereotype that you have heard about appearance or that culturally we hold about appearance? So we're thinking about gender expression. So if you saw someone from a distance, what sort of things would you be looking at to give your brain clues, right? Yeah, so I'm seeing long hair for girls. Yeah, certain clothing is gendered, skirts for girls. Yeah, short hair for men. Mm-hmm. Right. So sort of this pressure on femme presenting people to wear makeup. Um, yeah, men can't paint their nails. I would like tailor to like, thank you. Um, Jewelry. Yeah, a lot of these things are a lot of the clothing, like nails, jewelry, even the shoes we wear, right? These are all stereotypes, right? Because the idea is that um the way that we express ourselves outwardly, um that's really more an expression of ourselves, but our like culturally this gets very mixed together, right? And this is important to think about because stereotypes influence our own gender expression, but it also influences how we see other people, and we tend to make assumptions about other people based on stereotypes. And this is where our implicit bias is showing up for us. Because and it's not, I'm not saying that, you know, we're bad people because we have, you know, some of these stereotypical ideas. It's because our brains like shortcuts, right? We see someone who has long hair and is wearing a dress and high heels and has longer nails and wearing makeup, and our brain goes, she, her, right? It's a shortcut for us. We see someone who, you know, has a beard and, you know, wearing a suit and a tie, and our brain goes, he, him, right? Um, but, and we're probably right, like 90% of the time, but that 10% of the time that we're wrong, oof, this is that like impact versus intention thing that we were talking about right at the beginning. Our intention is to be like polite and respectful, and we see this a lot when people, you know, say, oh, excuse me, sir, pardon me, ma'am, you know, or use a Mr. or a Miss or Ms. Our intention is to be polite to people, and we're using cues that we see. We're using someone's name, you know, if it seems to be a gendered name, we're using the clothing that they wear to then talk to them in a certain way or use certain pronouns for them. And sometimes we're wrong. And so we just want to be aware of our own implicit bias around this. Okay, so now take a look at these folks. Can anyone tell me what these folks have in common? And they have a couple of things in common. So you're welcome to type in the chat, or you can just come off mute if typing in the chat is hard for you. I see they all use they, them pronouns. Yes, absolutely. So they have a couple of things in common. They're all celebrities, all artists, yes. They all use they, them, maybe some of them use they, them, and a combination, perhaps. She, they, or a JVN, I think, uses all pronouns. And they all have self-identified as falling under this non-binary umbrella. So this can be another like cultural stereotype or implicit bias that we have that we don't realize. If I had said, picture a non-binary person in your head, would you have pictured someone who looks like this? Or would you have pictured someone who looks like me? Some of us have like sort of this stereotype that non-binary people want to or will look androgynous. But there's plenty of ways to express our gender. And sometimes we get this question of like, well, how do I tell if someone is non-binary or trans? Like, how do I know? And that's a trick question because you cannot know unless we only know that information if someone discloses it to us. So we want to keep this in mind because, you know, as we're moving throughout the world, we're going to see folks, all kinds of gender expression. And if you can slow down that connection in your own brain between seeing someone and immediately assigning them a pronoun, if you just put a little pause there, you might find that people are more willing to be open with you, more willing to disclose certain things about themselves when you're not making those assumptions right away. So let's talk about pronouns. Spoiler alert, we use they, them pronouns all the time. We just don't realize that we're doing it. So when we don't know someone, when someone is like an unknown person, like they're not right next to us, right? They're the Amazon driver. Has the Amazon driver come yet? No, they haven't. Because we wouldn't, it would sound awkward if we said, oh no, he or she has not. It sounds a little stilted. We just said, no, they haven't. Someone left their phone here. Oh, I hope we can find them. Right. So we use singular they, them for folks all the time when we don't know the person. When we're using they them pronouns for someone who does use they them pronouns, so they're not like an unknown person, but they're someone that you're interacting with. Let's just talk about the grammar for a minute, because people can confuse themselves. And so let's just get clear on what the grammar is. So we'll talk about Jesse. Jesse, they're a therapist. Being a therapist is important to them. Youth mental health is a specialty of theirs. The only bit of grammar that we change here, they don't diagnose themselves because they are one person instead of saying themselves. There was a question on that quiz about, would you say they is or they are? Because we are talking about one person. There is another pronoun that we use all the time, and we do not change the verb, even though whether or not we're talking about one person or a group of people. So that, because we do the same thing with they, them, we don't change the verb. So whether we're talking about they, meaning Taylor, so they are on the Zoom call, or they, meaning the whole group of you all, they are on the Zoom call. We're not going to change the verb depending on whether it's one person or a group of people. We're still using they are. We do that with you. We do that all the time. We could say you, one person, you are on the Zoom call, or you as a group of people are on the Zoom call. It's the verb doesn't conjugate differently. Okay, I'm done with the grammar. A note here, a lot of you maybe use intake forms in your places where you are to get information from people. And we love it when organizations ask for pronouns in on a form. It's great. And it's great when people can just disclose that way. If you still have language that says preferred, we would love for you to just take off the preferred, because pronouns are not a preference. Pronouns are a part of our gender identity. And so saying that I prefer certain pronouns makes it seem like other pronouns would also be okay, right? So it's like, it's not an ice cream flavor where it's like, well, I really like chocolate and I don't prefer strawberry, but it's ice cream, so like I'll eat whatever. Like for pronouns, I use she, her, and they, them. But if you used he, him for me, like that's not a preference, that's just wrong. So just take off the preferred. We're all human. We're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna mess up. No one is expecting perfection. We do really appreciate effort. And so if despite your best efforts, you're talking about Jessie and you say, oh, Jessie cut her hair. If you catch yourself, you can just say, oh, whoops. They cut their hair, and you correct yourself and you just keep moving on. If someone else catches you and you say, oh, Jessie cut her hair, and someone says they, then you need to, the best practice is to go back and correct your sentence. Right, thank you. They cut their hair. Because if you keep practicing it the wrong way, right, we're embedding that in our brain and we're practicing the incorrect way. So correct yourself, accept the correction, and just keep going. All right, this is a little bit of practice. Normally we do these trainings in person, and we would have you do this like in pairs. So we'll try it this way. This is an experiment for us. Would someone be willing to come off of mute or type in the chat, tell us a story about Dawn, and here are some things about Dawn, and don't use any pronouns about this person? Because sometimes a best practice is to not use any pronouns for someone, but just to use someone's name. Because if you're either not sure what pronoun someone uses, or you have forgotten, or you're not sure if you can use those pronouns with someone in your vicinity, then you could just use their name. Yeah, I see someone wants to try. You want to take yourself off mute? Hopefully you can do that. Hopefully I don't have to do that.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. John hosted a book club on Saturday. Someone attended that book club and had a well-behaved dog that did not disturb the club. Another person picked up the next book to review.
Yeah. Yeah. So I heard you being really careful about trying not to use pronouns. Yes. So yeah, we would say something like, yeah, Dawn hosted our book club and Dawn had this like super well-behaved dog, so cute, just going around, prancing around. And then Dawn picked our next book and I'm really excited to read it. And if I was just verbally saying that, right? Maybe because you're looking at it and it's DAWN, but it could also be DON. And so sometimes, right, it's we want to maintain that ambiguity because maybe Dawn uses they them pronouns, but isn't sharing with other folks that they're doing that, or I'm not certain who they're sharing those pronouns with yet. So this is something that you can integrate into your own practice. And this is something that actually my kid catches me on all the time because I have a 7th grader. And I'll see someone at a distance and I'll say, oh yeah, that person crossing the street, she's got a really nice scarf. And my kid will say, you don't know their gender. And I'll say, that's correct. That person has a really nice scarf on, right? But I can also do that for, folks in my life who maybe I don't want to out them in a certain scenario. Maybe they're out to me, but they're not out to other people. So I'm just going to use their name when I'm talking about them. Okay. So one of the things that we recommend is if you can get pronouns from people in sort of like a passive way. So if you have a form and you ask them to disclose pronouns, if they want to, you make it optional. That's a really great way to get pronouns from other folks. Another really good way though to get pronouns from other people is to disclose your own. So folks in the LGBTQ community will feel more comfortable disclosing parts of their identity if you disclose yours first. And I see, some of the folks on the Zoom call, some of you have pronouns, next to your name. That's great because now I know which pronouns to use for you. Otherwise, I would just use your name, and that's fine. So we have a couple of ideas here for ways that you can share your pronouns and where, as a queer person, I'm going to be looking. I'm going to be looking in all of these spots to see whether or not you've used pronouns, because that's a signal to me. And it's not virtue signaling. Like, this is truly like looking for safety. I'm going to look in your email signature. I'm going to look on your website. If we're in person, do you have a pin like on your lanyard? When you're introducing yourself, when Taylor and I introduced ourselves, we used our pronouns. If you're in a position of power and you're leading a meeting or you're running something, you don't have to make everyone else share their pronouns, but you could share your own. And that can be really powerful. Do other folks have ideas about where you might share your pronouns? Maybe we've missed some spots. We update the slide deck every time. So if you have other places where you share your pronouns, like, please share in the chat. And like, we're all of us continuing to learn and grow as we go along. But these are some of the places that we really do look for pronouns, because that's telling us, that's giving us information. Okay. We also want to talk a little bit about inclusive language, because we can have really ingrained language patterns. And usually we're just trying to be polite. We're just trying to be polite people. You know, and usually it's when we're doing chit chat, like small talk, where we have these ingrained language patterns. You know, so it's that welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's, you know, oh yeah, let's talk to your mom or dad, or you're chit-chatting with a colleague, and oh, you know, do you have sons or daughters? Right? Um, well, you know, that person might not have a son or a daughter, but they might have a non-binary kid, right? And so now they're in this position of like, do I disclose that I have a non-binary child? And then we have to have a whole conversation about it. And if you had just said, do you have children, or, you know, do you have siblings, or do you have a partner or a significant other, you bringing your partner to the, you know, holiday party, like it just having that open language, again, you might find that people just disclose a little bit more to you because you have started with that inclusive language. You know, we don't always know someone's situation. So it just allows people to tell us who they are, and we're not making assumptions about them. And again, this goes back to this implicit bias in our language. And so the more that we can create opportunities for people to tell us who they are, the better. Okay, so all of these are real examples of things that we have heard people say or write to us. And we're hoping that either in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, could you correct this sentence, please? So this first one is, I have a client who is non-binary and she uses they, them pronouns. So how would you fix this? Like, what should this sentence really be? Yeah, Melody, I see you raised your hand. Go ahead.
I could say a client of mine identifies as non-binary and they use they, them pronouns.
Yes, yes, right. So, right, delete the she. Client who's non-binary uses they, them pronouns. Yeah, perfect. There's a little thing I would say too. Sometimes we still are, and actually in our presentation, we have just taken this out.
Oh.
And so this is not just for you. This is an update for a lot of people, I think.
Is it the identify with? Okay.
Identifies as, yes.
Well, I have
yes.
a child who is non-binary, so I would love to learn more.
Yeah. So because, you know, it's sort of like saying, you know, if someone is cisgender, right? Like I identify as a woman, like they would just say I'm a woman, right? Just like someone who's non-binary wouldn't say I identify as non-binary, they would just say I'm non-binary. So that's sort of a language update that we're seeing more and more for folks, is to drop the identify and to just say who they are.
Thank you
and
for
so
sharing.
It's like, yeah, absolutely. Well, this is an update that we have in our language, I would say just over the last like year. So maybe even more recently than that. Yeah. So this is our okay, second one. He was born male, but now identifies as a woman. How would we fix this sentence? And again, you can just type in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, or just come off mute, that's fine. Yes. I don't want to mispronounce your name.
That's okay. It's Eliana.
Eliana, thank you.
Yes, no problem. I would think you would say she was born male, but now identifies as a woman. Okay.
We're moving in the right direction. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. I like that. We're moving in the right direction. There's a little bit more refinement.
What do you say? She was born male, but now is a woman? Is that how you would say?
I would keep going a little more.
Okay.
Yes. Let's see. I see. Is it Cami? Do you wanna let's phone a friend?
Yeah. Hi. I would say She was assigned male at birth, and now she's a woman.
Okay. And I guess it depends on the context, right? Like, do we need to know someone's assigned sex at birth? Is it relevant to our conversation? And, you know, if you're a medical provider or you're in a medical setting and there's, you know, I know some of you are dealing with like sexual assaults, like maybe it is relevant to certain things. But on the whole, here's ours. She's transgender or she's trans. A lot of times, and people disclose this kind of information to us all the time. They will tell us sex assigned at birth all the time. And it's like, we don't really need to know that. Like there are two situations where knowing your sex assigned at birth might be relevant. And one of those is if we're going to be intimate with each other. And one of those is maybe if you're in a medical setting, right? So otherwise, you know, you could just say she's trans.
And I would say
Also,
the
though,
caveat, oh, I was gonna say, and the caveat on that one too, and I think I saw Stephanie had said it in the chat too, of like, you know, just she's a woman, right? Do I even need to know that
mhm,
she's trans?
right.
You know, the correct way is that would be the correct way to say that situation, but ultimately too, it's like, why am I sharing that? And I think that, you know, Lainey was saying that too, of, you know, the answer might just be she's a woman because that is true.
Right. Right. Yeah. We don't want to out folks. Um, so only if it's relevant. Only if it's relevant. Okay, how about this one? I work with, again, these are not made up ones. These are ones that we've heard. I work with gays, lesbians, and transgenders. Anyone have a fix for this one? You can type in the chat or come off mute. Yeah, I see. I work with the LGBT plus community. Yep. Right. So I work with LGBTQIA folks, or I work with gay, lesbian, and transgender people. All right. Yeah. And I see a little bit in the chat, sort of like individuals who identify as or identify within. And again, like an update, and this is like a recent update, is like we would take away that identify language. So just I work with individuals within the LGBTQ community. I work with, you know, LGBTQ individuals, etc. I see, Lori, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question. So I also have a child that is transgender, and often when, you know, we're going to appointments and things, they often say that they're trans feminine. Is that, you know, is that something that is used?
Yeah, if that's how your kiddo describes, what pronouns does your kid use?
They, them.
If that's how your kiddo describes themselves, then yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I think it's just a situation of like use the vocabulary that someone uses for themselves. Trans femme, yeah, and like femme mask is not is more like a gender expression, more of a like a outwardly presenting kind of identity. So, you know, you will hear folks say, you know, oh, I'm feeling a little more like femme today, maybe because they're wearing a dress, or, you know, I'm having a mask day because, you know, I'm wearing my, you know, whatever. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. A lot of you are probably experts in this active listening, especially if you're working with within your organizations and you're doing any sort of intake, you're working with individuals. Our best practice is to start with this open and inclusive language and then mirror what words the person uses. We are not saying that you have to use sibling if you have a brother. We are not saying that you have to use spouse if you have a husband, right? But we are saying that it's really helpful if you start that way and then you let people tell you the language that they use. Again, this is that implicit bias. We want to be careful about the assumptions that we're making. So if you're, and usually it comes up in the chit chat, right? We're just trying to like get to know somebody and we say, oh, how old is your child now? Right? And we're using child because we're not sure. And even if someone has an adult child, that's fine. You know, my son just turned 10, his birthday was last week, right? So now you know that they have a son and they used pronouns for their kid. So now you can use that language for that person. You know, or sometimes people, you know, will ask, how long have you been with your partner? You know, I met him 10 years ago. And they're like, okay, he, him for this person's partner, right? All right, I'm going to bump it back over to Taylor.
Yes. So we've talked just a little bit about, I think really just the idea of if we're asking for pronouns, right, on the intake form and things like that, taking off that preferred title. But I want to open it up to everyone to share of how are you asking right now for someone's affirming name and pronouns on intake forms when they're coming maybe into the clinic or wherever your work setting is. What have you found or what have you tried that a way to ask for somebody's affirming name and pronouns? Or if you want, oh,
Anyway, so we'll see. We'll see what, you know, what happens.
yeah, okay. No one's got anything. I have things for you, but if you have anything you want to pop in, feel free to chat, or if you wanted to raise your hand too and share. But you know, kind of breaks down into two things, right? Yes, right. So I'm a new client, right? I don't know much about them. What am I doing? What is my intake process? On my form, am I asking name, pronouns? Yeah. Yeah. So like Cami said, is a great one. A verbal introduction, right? You're meeting with them for the first time, you're introducing yourself, you use your pronouns like we were talking about before. It kind of creates just an opening of if they want to share their name and their pronouns, it's a lot easier to do that for someone who's already done it first. So that's always a great start. Are you comfortable sharing your name and pronouns with me? Right? Maybe they're not. Maybe they just want to tell you their name. But again, it gives them the opportunity. And honestly, even in that question, you're really emphasizing how important that is, which ultimately shows that you are a safe person if they feel comfortable sharing that with you. So really making sure, right, if you have a form currently, maybe add pronouns on there because ultimately it's important for you to know that too. As you're interacting with them, as you're getting to know them, is important information. Once you have that, are you being careful of, I know a lot of you are coming from different settings, but are you working with someone and their friends, their family, other people in their lives? So maybe you want to have some sort of question or intake form of, is this the pronoun that other people use for you? Really making sure that we don't accidentally out somebody to someone else if they're telling you what their pronoun is, but maybe it's not a pronoun that they use elsewhere. We want to be really, really careful to make sure that we're knowing that and keep being very mindful around that. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people that do have spaces for pronouns and that is amazing. Honestly, that's very exciting. And then, whether it's outside of even just the people you're directly interacting with, are you hiring people? Do you have volunteers? Anything like that? Does your application also have a space for that? Because ultimately, no matter what situation or way you're working with somebody, that is important information to know. So really kind of making sure you can provide that in some way. Yes, I saw Melody just commented. That is a great one, right? Of just having a pronouns in a line, not a checkoff box. I know I just yesterday was actually doing a job application and I had the options of he, him, she, her, and they, them. And I love that it has they, them. That is already a huge plus, but you can only click one. So for me, I had to pick one, but I use multiple. So that was, even in that kind of situation of making sure, do they have the option to pick multiple? Am I giving an opportunity to share if they do have neo pronouns, if they have a combination, things like that. Now, outside of that original intake process, right, we want to make sure we're creating a safe space for people. I know a lot of you are service providers, whether it's therapy, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, things like that. That's a very uncomfortable situation, right? It's important that the individuals are feeling safe. And a huge way to do that is around being an affirming space. Um, there's a lot of statistics that show, especially with domestic violence, interpersonal violence, that there's a heightened rate for LGBTQ people in experiencing interpersonal violence. And yet there's a lot of people that don't report it because they aren't sure that the spaces they would be going to are safe. So, you are up against that. You're really trying to make sure that from the second that you're meeting with somebody that you're showing them that you're safe. So any ideas? Same thing, chat, or if you want to raise your hand, how can you create your physical space that someone's coming into to be safe, to show them that it is a safe space for them? Rainbow sticker on your badge, that is a fantastic one. We'll talk about a little bit, but visible allyship, that visible sign is huge. I can tell you right now, I look for it everywhere I go, at my job, anywhere, just public spaces. It makes me feel safer. Especially right now, people are looking for that. Yep. Yeah. Inclusive posters in my office, right? Um, yeah. Using the name pronouns that somebody uses, yeah. Yeah. A gender neutral bathroom sign, right? In your office space, do you have a single stall bathroom? Does it have a gendered bathroom sign, even though it's for a single stall, or does it say all gender bathroom? Um, little things like that. It may not feel like that's a big difference, but it really is. So anything like that, it really is showing somebody that that is a safe space for them. But it's really built on that, the visible things. No, you're good, Lainey. Um, um, now, okay, outside of your work, outside of the physical space someone is coming into, how can you show the world, the LGBTQ people that you don't know, but that you may come in contact with, that you're a safe person? I guess I will start. Obviously, some of that is very similar, right? You could have the visible thing is still there. Maybe it's a sticker on your car. Maybe it's a pin. Yep, we love a good pin, and there's some great pins out there. It's simple pins. I have a little pin. It's just a little Progress Pride. Oh gosh, Progress Pride flag that I put on my badge at work. Um, yeah, it's all the things we were just talking about, using inclusive language, using pronouns properly, not making assumptions. That's all showing that you're a supportive person. Asking somebody, oh, do you have a significant other, rather than asking them, oh, do you have a husband? It's making them not have to correct you. I still get asked sometimes of, oh, do you have a girlfriend? It's uncomfortable. One, they've made an assumption about me. I have to now correct them if I want to answer them honestly. Or I just say no because I don't. But then they haven't learned as much about me, and it's put me in an uncomfortable situation and makes me feel like maybe they're not a safe person. Yep, pride keychains, right? Anything like that. That visible sign is so critical. Pronoun sharing is always a good one. Ultimately, if no one follows suit, no one else shares their pronouns, you have still made it a safer space by sharing yours. And ultimately, you've made sure that people hopefully will not misgender you. If you've shared your pronouns, and make sure that people just know the correct pronouns to use for you, so they don't have to make an assumption. They don't have to guess. Yes, we love ordering rainbow pins. Um, a pride flag in your office, at your house, outside of your house, anywhere like that. Anything like that. Now, thinking about, I know a lot, especially around domestic violence, maybe working with, sexual assault, anything like that. And so if you're looking at different terms for anatomy, are we being careful to be gender inclusive about the ways that we talk about physical anatomy? I guess, does anyone have any ways that they navigate that currently? Yeah. A big one here is, just being being very inclusive and very mindful about the language you're using to get go, but also using the term that they may use for their anatomy. That's a big one. Keep it kind of broad and what the terms that they maybe use to talk about their own body, talk about their body parts, use those terms for them. But it's a really way to make sure that we're not creating any sort of gender dysphoria if we're talking about, their body parts. Yeah, use the terms they use. That's really going to be the biggest one. Don't, try to correct them. Don't try to change the terms that they're using. If they're using certain terms for their own body, use those terms. As long as you understand what they're talking about, that's what matters. And that'll make them feel so much safer in a situation that they're already not going to be feeling very safe or very comfortable by talking about. Now, being left-handed. We have a graph here of individuals who from about 1890 to about the early 2000s and how many people identified as being left-handed. A pretty significant curve, right? You had very few people identifying, around 3.5% to about 12%, and it's stayed at that now since early 2000s. Who can think back to a time, or we know, right, that being left-handed was a bad thing? It was considered sinful. It was considered all kinds of things. You would get swatted on the wrist if you tried to use your left hand if you were left-handed. Come up to today where we have left-handed stores for all kinds of different things that are geared specifically for people who are left-handed. Did nature suddenly make more left-handed people? Probably not. It's not my area of expertise, so I can't promise you that's true, but I'm gonna guess no. But society got more accepting and more open to people being left-handed, and that it wasn't a bad thing, that is just how somebody was born, it's that they were left-handed. And so you see this curve of more people identifying, or I guess identifying on the poll that they were left-handed. Why am I bringing this up? Well, you see a very similar trajectory when you looked at individuals who are LGBTQ. Looking at the Gallup poll back from 2012 to the most recent one in 2023, it has basically doubled the amount of people in the US that identify as being LGBTQ. It's at about 7.6% of the entire population that identifies as being LGBTQ. And while that may not feel like a huge amount of people, I mean, that's millions of people. So it is pretty substantial. Again, did nature suddenly make more LGBTQ people? Probably not. Because even if you break it down and look at each generation, the same generation in each Gallup poll has more people that identify as being LGBTQ. So I think it's really a representation that as societies become more accepting and more open to people who are LGBTQ, and that it's not a bad thing, that it's not a sin, that it's simply just who someone is, that more people have been able and open to identify as who they actually are, even on an anonymous Gallup poll. I think it's very similar to left-handed thing. As society's been more open and recognizing that's not a bad thing, more people are willing to identify it just and say who they are. So, who knows where this number will go? Will it plateau at 12%? Will it be more? Who knows? But it's just really interesting to kind of look at that I think it does have representation around society and sort of just how open we are in general. Yeah. Now, if someone comes out to you, I think this is a really important one. We oftentimes, you see stories, you see books, you kind of have that one like huge coming out, right? They've told their parents, they've told everyone in their life, and now they're officially out. But any queer person can tell you, you're never officially out, because every time you meet someone new, you have to come out to that person. I mean, you don't have to, but they don't hypothetically know. And so, whether you're working with a new client, somebody you haven't met before, if they are telling you, that's potentially a situation that they may not be sure about how you're going to react. And so it's really important to be very mindful around that. Offer support, but don't assume that they need it. Someone may have no problem being LGBTQ, right? Their biggest concern might have been just sort of your reaction. So just offer support, show them that you're there, that you're totally cool with it, that you're a supportive and affirming person. Thank them for trusting you. That does show that you did probably do something that indicated to them that you were a safe person. So thank them for that trust. And ultimately from there, just listen. Do they want help telling somebody? Do they just want you to know? And be careful too of, maybe ask who else knows, so you don't accidentally out them to somebody that doesn't know that they're LGBTQ. And a big one too, is always to remember that someone hasn't changed. They're the same person they always have been. Obviously, it's a little bit different if it's someone that you've just met, because you don't have a memory of them before they may have come out to you. But especially people in our lives, when they come out, it sometimes feels like they're an entirely new person, and they're not. You know a little bit more about them, but ultimately they're the same person that they were 20 minutes before they just came and told you. So really remember that, one, they're not a new person, and also being LGBTQ is just one little part of them. There's so much more to a person than just their gender identity and their sexual orientation. And ultimately let the person take the lead. Maybe they just wanted you to know, maybe it was important in that moment. Maybe it's part of a bigger thing that they're talking about. But ultimately take the lead with where they want to go, why they did maybe come out to you. Now, kind of a final wrap up around the different things we've talked about, because ultimately all things we've talked about are really just being an inclusive person, being an ally. And so really, what can we be doing in our day-to-day lives to make sure that we are creating safe spaces, that we are being there for other people? Especially right now, it is very hard to be an LGBTQ person in the world. And we are looking for ways to know that we're safe, that somebody that we're talking to is a safe person. And I think now, probably more than ever, it's really critical that we're being very clear about that. I don't have to even assume a little bit or kind of take a jump of like, I think you're a safe person. Because oftentimes, I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience, unless it's very clear that someone is a safe, affirming person, I'm assuming that they are not. Because it's safer to me to go with that than to assume they were and find out that they actually weren't. So what can we do? Be visible. I cannot say this one enough, because I think this is one of the easiest ways to really do it. I mean, pins, having a flag, a bracelet, a sticker on your car, anything like that makes a huge impact. And I can tell you right now, LGBTQ people, kids to adults, are looking for those. Educating yourself. You did it today. So well done, everyone. But also, we're all learning, right? Lady and I have said we change our training itself quite often, because we're learning from the people we're here to educate. You never know where you're going to learn or who you're going to learn something from, but always be learning. Maybe someone told you their identity and you have no idea what that term means. Learn about it. Educate yourself, kind of see how best you can support that person. Correct and move on. You use the wrong name, the wrong pronouns for somebody. Don't overly apologize. Don't make it a whole scene. Correct and move on. Be mindful in the future as you go forward to not make that mistake again. But again, mistakes will happen. I've misgendered people. I've used the wrong name and pronouns. Correct, move on. Never out someone. That's why we had you practice with using name instead of pronouns. If you're not sure, that's a safe bet. It's much, much better to do that and have it be a little bit awkward as you're trying to navigate that than to accidentally out someone to someone who doesn't know that they're LGBTQ or what pronouns they may use. All gender bathroom and spaces, especially if you have any kind of office that has a single stall bathroom, a really easy fix is to swap out that sign next to the bathroom. So it's not the little man, woman, and person in a wheelchair, but just, an all bathroom sign. You can get them online. They're not that expensive. And that is a huge way to really make a difference and really stand out to someone. And be even very careful with our language, right? It's very easy for us. It's oftentimes we're just trying to get to know somebody, but it's very easy to make an assumption when we're asking questions, when we're trying to get to know someone, which ultimately makes it actually harder to get to know that person. So just being really careful around it. What language am I using? What am I asking? Because ultimately you'll actually learn more about that person. if you're able to kind of start from that inclusive and open space. And ultimately, Lainey and I are actually both from different PFLAG chapters, but PFLAG Danville San Ramon Valley is a chapter I'm a part of. But both chapters have a monthly support meeting. We have different speakers come in. We do a lot of advocacy and education in the community. The email on here, education@srvpflag, actually goes to Lainey and myself. So any questions after this training, if something comes up, if you wanted to run something by us, we are here to be a resource for you. So please, reach out to us. We are here for you. I know we have about 5 minutes now, so I would really love to open up if there's any questions, if there's been a situation. Oh, yes, Eliana.
Perfect. So I have a question. I had a student come in who is trans male. They came in on Tuesday and they let me know their preferred name, but in our system, it's their name assigned at birth. And that's the name that I have to put on the application. But like, how would I go about that? Obviously, I asked like, hey, in our system, it does have your assigned name, your name at birth. Is it okay that I put that down? But how would you like go about that? And I have other students too who have like who aren't trans or anything, but they also have a preferred name. How would you just go about that if it differs from what's in our system?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, the way you did already handle that was awesome. The question is who's seeing that form? That because one would be, I guess, can you notate on the form if even like what the name that their affirming name is for somebody else? So if they're looking at that, they would know what name to use for them.
I did so in our notes, because we use Epic. So in the Epic notes, I
Okay.
did put preferred. I did put parentheses like in the preferred name, like in the appointment notes. On the application, I also put their preferred name in like parentheses. Yeah, I would just have questions because they in the school system it was their preferred name, but I guess I was just wondering like how you would go about that, or like I guess like how you would, I don't know, I guess it was just a different situation, so
I think we often run into this issue with systems, right? And like I work really closely with some of our local school districts and similar issues, right? Like there's no field for pronouns. There's no field for a true name. There's no way to notate that. And so a lot of folks are doing the workaround, right? Like for your system, it needs a legal name. So, is there a way for you to annotate it? Is there a way for you to, in parentheses, put it and know that that's the name that they want to be addressed by? Sometimes we have to do these workarounds because the systems are not built with us in mind. So I would say just keep doing what you're doing, try and figure out how to work within the system so that, that person isn't getting called by the wrong name. Like that's really hard when you're coming in, you're trusting someone, and then if there's not space in the system, you've already disclosed. And then if the next person doesn't use the right name, it's like, oh, but I already told you, So yeah, I think keep trying to figure out how to make it work within your system, like try and find a workaround within the system to annotate it somewhere.
okay, yeah, that was the priority I made sure. I was like, I just need to make sure everyone is using the preferred name, so I tried to put that everywhere as much as I can, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're doing a great job with that already. So props to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I see in the chat too, someone suggested, you can cover like a name if you have forms where, the name gets printed out or there, it's somewhere on the sheet to like cover it so that, it's that like visual barrier so that they don't have to interact with it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Patrice.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that, on something that I saw happen. I work with the live scan, bringing people on into doing work with kids in our organization. And that's a form that's put out by the California Department of Justice. And they recently updated their form to include non-binary. So I think that actually going to whoever runs Epic. I know that's a big medical form, people, but I think actually going to the people that are creating these forms and letting them know, hey, you need to update your forms. If they get enough people telling them that, they'll do it. So, obviously workarounds are important in the moment, but I think we can do it, get to the actual source of those things and help fix them that way too.
That is an excellent point. When I'm working with school districts too, I often say we are not the only school with this issue, right? There are lots of us. So let's like take it to the people, like they are a service that we are paying for. And so the service should reflect our needs. We're not going to like, we don't need to fit into your little boxes. You make the boxes for us.
Any
I
other?
think,
Oh.
yeah, I mean, I don't know about, I don't want to speak for Taylor, but I'm happy to stay on for a little bit if you all want to ask some questions. We can also do like a breakout room if you want to ask something privately. But if other folks have, especially, the thing is, if you have a question, it's likely somebody else also has it. Like if you encountered something in your work and you're like, ugh, how do I manage this or deal with this? It's very likely someone else has encountered that situation too.
Yeah, definitely. And again, you will receive the slides. I'll have them, I'll get them to Natalie to send out to everyone that was in attendance. You'll have those too.
All right. Well, we'll
Thanks,
stick
everybody.
around for a couple of minutes, but Natalie, if you have anything to add in the wrap up.
No, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to Taylor and Lainey for wonderful information that's really important, especially in the current climate that we're working within. So wonderful information for you all to share. We've recorded this session, so we'll be able to put it on our YouTube page. If you want to share it with any of your colleagues or friends, you're more than welcome to. That'll probably be up next week. And in the meantime, have a wonderful Friday. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day if you choose to celebrate that. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you.